The night was cold, and the ruins of the broken city lay in silence. The human traveler, named Daniel, walked carefully between the cracked stones and fallen walls. He had been moving for hours, searching for shelter, but something in the air made him uneasy. The wind carried not just dust, but a sound, soft and trembling, almost like a sob. Daniel stopped, his eyes narrowed as he listened closely. Again, the sound came, a faint whimper hidden under the rubble. His heart quickened. He knew this land was dangerous. Many traps and enemies could be hiding here, yet the sound did not belong to a soldier. It was too small, too fragile. He pushed aside a broken beam and saw her, a tiny figure curled up in the shadow of the ruins. Her skin shimmered faintly under the moonlight, not like human skin but smoother, glowing softly with faint patterns like starlight on water. Her eyes were wide, luminous, and filled with fear. She looked no older than a child, but her features were delicate, otherworldly. Daniel froze. He had never seen such a creature this close. Stories about alien children abandoned in war zones had spread across the frontier. Some said they were dangerous, others claimed they were cursed. But the trembling girl before him looked nothing like a threat. She looked hungry, weak, and very alone. The girl pressed herself back against the wall when a shadow fell over her. Her tiny hands shook, clutching a torn piece of cloth around her shoulders. She whispered something in a language Daniel could not understand. The sound was broken, weak, and filled with fear. Slowly, Daniel knelt down. His voice was gentle, softer than the wind. "I am not here to hurt you," he said, though he doubted she understood his words. He reached into his pack and pulled out a piece of bread, breaking it in half. He placed it on the ground and slid it toward her, the girl's glowing Yes flickered between the food and his face. Suspicion and hunger fought inside her. Finally, with trembling fingers, she reached forward and snatched the bread. She tore into it with quick bites, almost desperate. Daniel watched quietly, not moving closer. For a long moment, the only sound was her eating. Slowly, her shoulders eased, her trembling lessened. She looked up at him again, and this time her eyes held not just fear, but also curiosity. Daniel smiled faintly, though his chest felt heavy. Whoever she was, she had been abandoned, left to survive in these dead ruins. He wondered who could leave such a small child alone. His heart tightened with anger at the thought. The girl whispered again, softer this time. Her voice carried something like a question, though the words were alien. She tilted her head, staring at him. Daniel placed his hand gently over his chest and said, "Daniel," pointing to himself. Then he pointed at her. His eyes asked silently for her name. She hesitated. Her lips parted and she spoke a single word. "Lyra." Her voice cracked, but her name was clear. Daniel repeated it softly. "Lyra." She blinked, her eyes wide as if surprised he respected her name. She pulled the torn cloth tighter around her, but her trembling had almost stopped. The night deepened and the wind grew colder. Daniel knew he could not leave her here. If soldiers or scavengers found her, she would not survive. He looked around the ruins for a safer place. His instincts told him to move, to find shelter before the dawn. "Come with me," he said, motioning with his hand. He stepped back slowly, giving her space. She hesitated, clutching the bread tightly in her hand. For a moment, it seemed she would refuse. Then, with cautious steps, she moved toward him. Her small figure walked close behind him, her glowing eyes never leaving his back. She was afraid, but she had chosen to follow. And in that simple choice, Daniel felt something shift inside him. He was no longer alone in the ruins, and neither was she. The ruins stretched far behind them as Daniel led the way. His steps were slow, careful, because he knew the little alien girl was still afraid. Each sound of her light footsteps echoed softly behind him, and though she tried to stay silent, he could feel her presence, small and uncertain. The night air grew colder. A broken outpost stood in the distance, half buried in sand and stone. Daniel guided her there, hoping for shelter. Inside, the walls leaned but still gave protection from the wind. He spread his old blanket across the floor and motioned for her to sit. The girl, Lyra, stood frozen at first, clutching the piece of bread as if it were treasure. Her glowing eyes studied him, filled with doubt. Slowly, she lowered herself onto the blanket, still keeping distance. Her tiny hands clutched the cloth around her shoulders. Daniel sat down a few steps away. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small flask of water. He placed it gently between them and slid it closer. She looked at it, hesitating, then finally lifted it to her lips. The way she drank told him she had not tasted water in days. Slowly, Daniel whispered. She paused, her eyes flickering toward him. For a moment he thought she might shrink back again, but then she nodded slightly, as if she understood. She sipped carefully, and when she placed the flask down, her trembling was less than before. The silence between them stretched. It was heavy, yet not empty. Lyra glanced at him again, this time longer. Her lips parted, and she spoke a few words in her own tongue. The sounds were soft and uncertain. Daniel shook his head gently. "I don't understand," he admitted, pointing to his ear and then shrugging. She tilted her head, confusion mixed with frustration. After a long pause, she touched her chest with her hand and whispered, "Lyra." Her voice was weak but steady. Daniel's heart lifted. He repeated softly, "Lyra," and pointed to her. Her eyes widened, almost glowing brighter. He then touched his chest. "Daniel," he said again. She repeated it slowly. "Neil." The sound of his name from her lips made him smile without meaning to. For the first time, her fear softened. A fragile thread of trust began to form. The wind howled outside the broken walls, and Lyra drew closer to the blanket's edge. Daniel noticed she was shivering. Without a word, he took off his outer jacket and placed it on the ground between them. She stared at it, hesitant, then slowly pulled it around her shoulders. Her tiny frame almost disappeared in the heavy cloth. For the first time, a sound came from her that was not fear or sorrow, a tiny sigh of comfort. Daniel looked away, not wanting to make her feel watched. But inside, he felt a warmth spreading through his chest. As the night deepened, shadows crept along the broken walls. Daniel knew danger was always near. Patrols or scavengers could pass at any time. Yet in that small outpost, he felt something rare. Safety. Not because the place was safe, but because the girl beside him had begun to trust. Lyra's eyes grew heavy. She curled into the blanket, still clutching the bread in one hand. Her other hand rested near the edge of Daniel's jacket, almost touching the ground between them. She looked once more at him, whispering a word too soft to understand. Then her eyes closed, her breathing gentle. Daniel sat awake, listening to the wind. He did not know why he felt so protective of her. She was a stranger, an alien, someone he should fear. But watching her sleep, so small, so vulnerable, he felt something else, a bond that words could not explain. And as the first pale light of dawn touched the horizon, Daniel knew one thing. He could not leave her, not now, not ever. The morning light did not bring peace. Instead, it carried new danger. Daniel noticed tracks in the dust near the ruins, heavy boots pressed deep into the ground. They were fresh, too fresh. His instincts told him they were not alone anymore. Lyra walked close behind him, clutching the blanket he had wrapped around her. Her glowing eyes blinked against the rising sun. She trusted him more now, but fear still lingered in her steps. She seemed to sense something, her small head turning quickly at every sound. Daniel raised a hand, signaling her to stop. He crouched low and studied the earth. The tracks were heading toward their shelter. His chest tightened. Soldiers, scavengers, or hunters, it did not matter. Whoever they were, they would not spare a child like her. He whispered, "We need to move." His voice was low but calm, though his heart beat hard against his ribs. He guided Lyra down a narrow path between crumbled walls, keeping her in the shadows. She followed without a word, her tiny fingers clutching the edge of his coat. They had only walked a short distance when the first sound reached them. Voices, sharp and cold, echoing across the ruins. Daniel froze, pulling Lyra behind a broken column. The voices were getting closer, speaking in harsh tones he did not understand, but their steps were heavy, steady, like men who hunted without mercy. Lyra's body trembled, her glowing skin flickered faintly as if responding to her fear. Daniel pressed a finger to his lips, telling her to stay quiet. Her small lips pressed shut, though her wide eyes brimmed with tears. The footsteps grew louder. Dust rose in the distance. The hunters were near. Daniel knew they could not stay hidden for long. He looked at the little girl and whispered, "When I run, you run too. Stay close." She nodded once, her hands shaking but her eyes locked on him. A shadow passed over the broken wall. Daniel tensed. Then he grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her into the open. They sprinted down the ruined street, stones crunching beneath their feet. Shouts erupted behind them, harsh and violent. The chase had begun. Daniel's boots hit the ground hard, his breath steady but fast. Lyra's small feet pattered beside him. She stumbled once, but he caught her arm and pulled her back up without stopping. The hunters were closing in, their voices echoing like thunder in the ruins. Ahead, the street split into two paths. Daniel chose the narrow one, hoping it would slow their pursuers. Broken buildings loomed overhead, and debris scattered the way. Lyra squeezed his hand tightly, her face pale but determined. She was running with everything she had. An arrow hissed past them, striking the wall with a sharp crack. Lyra gasped. Daniel shielded her with his body as they kept moving. He knew they would not stop until they caught them. The girl was their target, not him. Something about her made her valuable to them. He could see it in the way they shouted her name. "Lyra!" one of the hunters roared. His voice was filled with rage. The girl whimpered but did not stop running. Daniel felt her hand tighten painfully around his. They reached the edge of the ruins. Beyond was a steep slope leading into a dried riverbed. Without hesitation, Daniel pulled her down the slope, sliding across loose stones. Lyra stumbled and fell, but he grabbed her again. His body shielded hers as they rolled into the riverbed. Dust filled the air, but they were hidden for a moment. Daniel pulled her to her feet. "Keep moving," he whispered. His voice was steady even as his lungs burned. Lyra's legs shook, but she nodded. Her courage shone through her fear. Behind them, the hunters' voices grew louder. They had seen where the two had gone. The chase was not over. It had only just begun. Daniel's breath came heavy as he guided Lyra through the dry riverbed. The sound of hunters still echoed in the distance, but the slope and stones had slowed them. He kept her hand in his, refusing to let go. Her small fingers were trembling, yet she never once asked to stop. The sun was rising higher, spreading light across the broken land. They could not keep running in the open. Daniel scanned the cliffs, searching for a place to hide. His eyes caught a faint opening in the rocks, half covered by vines and rubble. It looked small, but it might be enough. "Here," he whispered, tugging her forward. They climbed over the stones until they reached the narrow crack. Daniel pushed aside the vines and slipped inside. Lyra followed, her tiny frame fitting easily. Inside was darkness, but safe darkness. The sound of their footsteps echoed softly as they entered. The passage led into a hollow chamber carved long ago. The walls bore strange markings, faded with time. It smelled of dust and damp earth, but it was shelter. Daniel set his pack down and listened. Outside, voices grew fainter. The hunters had passed by. For the first time since dawn, silence returned. Lyra sank to the ground, her small chest rising and falling quickly. She hugged the blanket close and whispered something in her language. Her voice shook, but her eyes lifted toward Daniel. He did not know her words, but he felt the meaning. She was asking if they were safe. Daniel nodded. For now. His voice was calm, steady. He knelt beside her and offered water from his canteen. She drank carefully this time, not desperate like before. Her glowing eyes studied him as though trying to understand why he stayed with her. They rested in the dim chamber. Daniel leaned back against the wall, his mind turning over the events of the morning. These hunters wanted Lyra, not just because she was a child. Something else. He was hidden within her. Something they feared or desired. Lyra moved closer, sitting just a step away. She held out her small hand and traced one of the faded markings on the wall. A soft hum left her lips. Daniel watched with surprise. The markings glowed faintly under her touch, pale light spreading through the stone like fire through cracks. Her eyes widened as much as his. She pulled her hand back quickly. The glow faded, leaving only silence. Daniel realized then, she was connected to this place. Maybe her people had built it long ago. Maybe she was more important than even she understood. He lowered his voice. "That's why they want you." Lyra looked at him, confused, but something in his tone made her small lips press into a trembling line. The hours passed slowly. Daniel kept watch near the entrance, listening for danger. Lyra curled beneath the blanket, but she did not sleep. Every few minutes her eyes opened, searching for him. When she found him still there, she closed them again. At one point she whispered, "Daniel?" Her voice soft, broken but clear. It was the first human word she had spoken fully. His head turned sharply, his chest tightened at the sound. She trusted him enough to say his name. He moved back to her side, kneeling so his face was level with hers. "Yes," he answered gently. She reached out with her tiny hand and touched his arm, just for a moment. It was enough. That single touch carried more than words. Outside, the land remained dangerous. Hunters roamed, waiting. But within the hidden refuge, a fragile peace held. Daniel knew it would not last forever. Yet for this moment, he let himself breathe. He was no longer just a traveler. He was her protector. And though he did not say it aloud, he already knew. He would never abandon her, not to the hunters, not to anyone. The refuge gave them a few hours of peace, but Daniel knew it would not last. Danger always moved with silence before it struck. He sat at the edge of the chamber, eyes fixed on the crack of light spilling through the entrance. His body was tired, but his mind stayed sharp. Lyra rested against the wall, wrapped in the blanket. Her glowing patterns flickered faintly as she breathed. She looked calmer now, but Daniel could see the weight of fear still pressing on her. Every sound outside made her tense, her eyes snapping open. She was learning to survive like him, always listening, always ready. The wind shifted, carrying voices. Daniel stiffened. He pressed a hand against the stone, tilting his head to hear. Low voices, harsh and steady. The hunters had returned. They were searching, sweeping the ruins piece by piece. His jaw tightened. He had hoped they would give up, but clearly Lyra was too important. He turned to the girl. Her eyes were wide. She whispered something in her alien tongue. Her voice was shaking. Daniel crouched before her and shook his head. "Quiet, stay still," he whispered, pressing a finger to his lips. She nodded quickly, clutching the blanket close to her chest. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Stones crunched under heavy boots. Shadows moved across the narrow entrance. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. He reached for his weapon, a simple blade, not much against trained hunters, but it was all he had. Lyra's small hand touched his sleeve. Her eyes begged him not to leave her. He leaned closer, whispering, "I won't." His voice was steady, though his blood felt like fire. He knew this was the moment. They would either be discovered or survive by silence. A heavy thud struck the ground outside. Then a voice barked orders. Harsh words echoed through the air. Daniel could not understand them, but he knew the tone. It was the sound of men commanding others to search deeper. The chamber walls vibrated faintly as boots crunched closer. Daniel pulled Lyra gently behind a large stone pillar, pressing her small body into the shadows. Her breath came fast and shallow. He bent close, whispering so softly only she could hear. "Breathe slow, stay calm." She tried, her tiny chest rising and falling unevenly, but she nodded. The sound of rocks shifting echoed at the entrance. The vines were being pulled away. Daniel gripped his blade tighter. Sweat slid down his neck. He could hear one of the hunters muttering as he stepped near the crack. For a heartbeat, the chamber felt like a trap closing in. Lyra's hand found his again. Her fingers squeezed tight, and in that terrifying silence, Daniel felt his own fear soften. He could not explain it, but her touch steadied him, reminded him why he was fighting. The shadow leaned closer at the entrance. A glint of armor reflected the faint light. Daniel's muscles tensed, prepared to strike. But then another voice shouted from farther away. The hunter at the crack hesitated, growled something in frustration, and turned back. Their footsteps retreated, fading slowly into the ruins. Daniel exhaled, his body sagging against the stone. Lyra collapsed against him, trembling with relief. She whispered his name again. "Daniel," her voice soft but clear. It was not fear this time. It was trust. He sheathed his blade and held her close. The hunters would not stop. He knew they would search again, harder, deeper. But for now, they were safe. And in that fragile safety, something powerful grew. Her fear began to fade when she looked into his eyes. His calm presence anchored her. She no longer felt abandoned, not while he was near. And Daniel, feeling her small hand in his, understood something too. He was no longer just protecting her out of duty. His heart was already bound to hers. Outside, the enemy still moved like wolves, circling, waiting for weakness. Inside, a bond stronger than fear was being forged. The hunters might approach again, but they would not break it. Night returned, heavy and quiet. The hunters had not found them, but Daniel knew they were still close. He could feel the danger pressing against the walls of the refuge, yet inside the chamber another kind of silence grew, softer, warmer. Lyra sat near him, her small figure wrapped in the blanket. Her glowing patterns shimmered faintly in the dark. Every so often her eyes lifted to meet his and then quickly turned away. She was still afraid, but not of him anymore. It was a different kind of fear, one that mixed with curiosity. Daniel set a small fire using broken wood and scraps. The flame was weak but enough to push back the darkness. He watched her from the corner of his eye. She leaned closer to the fire, her face glowing like a fragile star. For a long time neither spoke. The silence was strange, yet it did not feel empty. Finally, she whispered his name, "Daniel." Her voice was soft, trembling but full of meaning. He looked at her. His heart tightened. She said his name again, as if to make sure it was real. His lips curved in a faint smile. "You're safe," he said gently, though he knew she barely understood his words, but she understood the tone. Her glowing eyes softened. The hours passed slowly. Outside, the night carried distant howls and the crack of shifting stone. Inside, the two sat close, sharing warmth and silence. At one point, Lyra shivered and leaned against him. Daniel adjusted the blanket so it covered them both. Her small body rested against his arm. Her head tilted, and for the first time she allowed herself to breathe easily. Daniel's heart pounded. He had fought battles, seen death, faced storms. Yet this moment unsettled him more than all of it. The closeness of a childlike but strange and fragile being, trusting him so fully, made his chest ache. Her glowing eyes lifted again, and this time she did not turn away. She studied his face, her expression unreadable. Slowly she reached out with her small hand. Her fingers brushed his cheek, warm and trembling. He froze, his breath caught. For a long moment neither moved. The fire crackled softly. Lyra leaned closer. Her lips parted. She whispered something in her alien tongue, too soft to understand. Then, before he could react, she touched her lips gently to his. The kiss was not long, not strong, but it was enough. Daniel's heart shook. His body froze. Every thought scattered. He pulled back slightly, eyes wide with shock. But Lyra's eyes were calm, shimmering with emotion he could not name. She leaned back slowly, her tiny hands clutching the blanket again. Her glowing cheeks brightened. She lowered her head as if embarrassed, yet there was no fear in her, only a strange courage. Daniel's chest rose and fell quickly. He stared at her in silence. His heart was loud inside him. He had not expected this, not from her, not here. But the meaning was clear. She had chosen to trust him, to share a piece of herself. He leaned closer, his voice soft as a whisper. "Lyra." She looked up, her glowing eyes filled with tears that did not fall. She did not speak, but her silence was louder than any word. The night grew colder, but the fire between them warmed the chamber. Daniel did not touch her again, but he did not move away. They sat together, close enough to feel each other's breath. The bond between them had crossed a line, fragile but unbreakable. Outside, the hunters circled in darkness, waiting for the right moment. Inside, a silent kiss had changed everything. Daniel knew nothing would be the same again. Not for him, not for her. The fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers. Daniel sat awake, his back against the wall. His thoughts were heavy, replaying the moment again and again. The gentle kiss had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. He had seen it in her eyes. It was not just fear or gratitude. It was something deeper. Lyra slept lightly beside him, her small figure curled beneath the blanket. Her glowing skin flickered in rhythm with her breaths. She looked peaceful, but even in her rest she twitched as if haunted by old memories. Daniel studied her quietly, wondering what kind of past she carried, what pain had shaped her so young. When the first light of dawn entered the chamber, Lyra stirred, her eyes opened slowly, catching the soft rays of morning. She blinked, then sat up. Her gaze found Daniel instantly. For a moment, her expression was blank, then something shifted. Warmth filled her glowing eyes. She whispered his name again, "Daniel." Her voice was clearer now, stronger, as though the night had changed something inside her. He nodded, offering a faint smile. "You're safe," he whispered. She leaned closer, her small hand brushing his sleeve. She was not trembling anymore. It was as if the kiss had unlocked a courage she never knew she had. She began to speak in her own language, her words flowing fast. Daniel could not understand, but he listened. Her tone carried no fear, no hesitation. She spoke as if pouring out her heart. At one point, she pressed her small hand against her chest and then pointed at him. Her glowing eyes searched his face for a reaction. He placed his hand over his chest too and nodded. She smiled faintly. A new strength filled her face, fragile but shining. Outside, distant sounds of movement reminded Daniel the hunters were still searching, but inside the refuge, something stronger than fear was building. Lyra no longer shrank at every noise. Instead, she sat upright, her tiny frame straight, her glowing patterns pulsed brighter, as if a hidden energy was waking inside her. Daniel noticed it, his brows furrowed. "What are you?" he whispered softly to himself. She tilted her head as though sensing his thought. Then she lifted her small hands and placed them on the stone wall. Like before, the markings came alive, glowing faintly under her touch. But this time, she did not pull back. She held steady, her glow merging with the faded light of the ruins. Daniel's eyes widened. The chamber vibrated softly. Dust fell from the ceiling. Lyra's body shook, but she did not stop. Her patterns flared brighter, her voice humming in a strange melodic tone. Then just as quickly the glow faded. She slumped back, breathing hard. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her eyes, they were not the same. They carried determination. She whispered his name once more, her voice firm, not trembling. Daniel caught her before she fell completely, cradling her against him. His chest tightened. She was no ordinary child. She carried something powerful within her, something the hunters wanted. And now he had seen it awaken. Her small hand reached for his again, her glowing eyes locked on his face. "Stay," she whispered in broken human tongue. His heart shook at the sound, her first true plea to him in his own words. "I'll stay," he promised without hesitation, his voice steady. She smiled weakly, her eyelids heavy. Then she rested her head against his chest, trusting completely. The hunters were still out there, stronger and more dangerous than ever. But Daniel realized something important. He was not just protecting her anymore. He was standing beside her, protecting what she could become. The silent kiss had started it, but the awakening had changed everything. She was no longer just a frightened child. She was something more. And Daniel knew her future was now tied to his. The morning silence did not last. Daniel knew it before the first stone shifted outside. The hunters had returned, their voices sharper, angrier. They had searched all night, and now they were closing in. Lyra stirred, her glowing eyes opening slowly. She looked at Daniel, sensing his tension. Her small hand gripped his sleeve. He placed a finger to his lips and whispered, "Stay behind me." She nodded, her face pale but steady. The fear was still there, but something else burned beneath it, a courage he had not seen before. The sound of boots echoed against the rocks. Shadows moved across the crack of light at the entrance. Then with a violent pull, the vines covering the opening were torn away. Blinding daylight flooded the chamber, and armed hunters stepped inside. Daniel rose to his feet, his blade already drawn. His stance was firm, though he was outnumbered. He placed himself between Lyra and the enemy, his voice low but filled with iron. "You'll have to go through me first." They did not understand his words, but they understood his defiance. The first hunter lunged, swinging a jagged weapon. Daniel blocked with his blade, sparks flying. He pushed back hard, forcing the man into the wall. Another rushed in. Daniel ducked and struck low, his blade cutting across armor. Painful cries filled the chamber, but more poured in. Behind him, Lyra trembled. Her glowing patterns flickered wildly. Fear battled with the strange power inside her. She clutched the stone wall, whispering something in her alien tongue. The markings glowed faintly, responding to her touch. Daniel fought fiercely, his movements fast but desperate. A blade grazed his shoulder, blood staining his sleeve. He gritted his teeth, refusing to fall. He struck again and again, holding the line. He could feel his strength waning, but he would not let them reach her. One of the hunters shoved him back. His blade slipped from his hand and clattered to the ground. The enemy raised a weapon high, ready to strike the final blow. Daniel braced himself, but before the blade could fall, light burst through the chamber. Lyra had stepped forward, her tiny hands glowing. The markings on the walls flared bright like fire. The hunter staggered back, blinded. The others shouted in alarm. Daniel turned, his eyes widening. Lyra's whole body was shimmering. Her patterns burned like stars. She cried out, her voice shaking the air. A wave of energy pulsed from her, striking the hunters. The ground trembled as they were thrown against the walls. Weapons clattered to the floor, their faces twisted in fear. They had wanted her power, but now they saw its true strength. Daniel stared in awe, but quickly grabbed his blade again. He stood at her side, cutting down those who tried to rise. Together they pushed the hunters back, Lyra's power blazing, Daniel's steel striking, the chamber filled with smoke, light, and the sound of battle. Finally, the last hunter stumbled out, dragging his wounded body. The others followed, fear replacing their anger. Their leader shouted, ordering a retreat. The footsteps faded into the distance, leaving only silence and the crackle of broken stone. Lyra collapsed to her knees, her glow fading. Daniel dropped beside her, catching her before she fell. Her small body shook violently. She had used too much. Her glowing eyes dimmed, but she managed to whisper his name, Daniel. He held her close, his heart pounding. "I'm here," he whispered firmly. His arms shielded her trembling body. His chest burned with pride and fear all at once. He had seen her strength, but also how fragile she was. The hunters would return, stronger and angrier. But for now they had survived. Daniel lifted her gently, his voice steady. They will not take you, not while I breathe. And for the first time, Lyra believed it completely. Her eyes closed, but her small hand clung to his shirt. She was no longer just a frightened girl hiding in ruins. She had stood with him, and together they had turned the tide. The chamber was quiet again, though the silence felt heavy. Daniel sat with his back against the wall, Lyra resting in his arms. Her body was weak from using her strange power, yet her small hand never let go of his shirt. He looked down at her glowing face, pale but still beautiful in its fragile light. He knew the hunters would come back. They would bring more men, stronger weapons. They would not stop until they had her. His heart wrestled with the truth. If he stayed with her, he would be hunted too. He could try to escape alone, vanish into the wild. But every time he imagined leaving, the thought cut deeper than any blade. Lyra stirred, her glowing eyes opening slowly. She whispered his name. Daniel. Her voice was faint, but it held trust. It held a question too. Would he leave her like the others did, or would he stay? He swallowed hard, brushing dust from her hair. I'm here, he whispered back. But the doubt inside him gnawed at his chest. How long could he protect her? How long before the hunters overwhelmed them both? The day passed slowly. Daniel kept watch at the entrance. Every sound outside made his muscles tighten. Lyra sat near him, recovering. Her glowing patterns were dimmer now, but her spirit seemed brighter. She tried to stand on her own, though her legs trembled. She refused to be only a burden. At one point, she walked to him, her steps small but determined. She touched his arm, looked into his eyes, and whispered in broken human words, "Stay, Daniel. Don't leave." His heart shook. He saw the fear in her eyes, but also the hope. She was not asking for food, not asking for safety. She was asking for him, his choice, his promise. Daniel knelt in front of her, his rough hands cupped her small shoulders. He wanted to speak, but his throat tightened. For years, he had walked alone, carrying only his own survival. Now, this tiny alien girl had changed everything. She had kissed him, trusted him, fought beside him. She had awakened something in him that he thought was long gone. Lyra, he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. Her glowing eyes widened, waiting. He brushed a strand of her hair gently back. His choice was no longer a question. I will not leave you. Tears filled her eyes, shimmering in the faint glow of her skin. She leaned forward, pressing her small forehead against his chest, his arms wrapped around her, holding her close. The bond between them sealed not by words alone, but by heart. But even in that moment of peace, Daniel knew the danger was real. The hunters were regrouping. He could hear faint echoes of their horns in the distance. Time was running out. He pulled back slightly, lifting her chin so she would look at him. They will come again, he said firmly. But no matter what happens, I will stand with you. She nodded, her tears falling but her lips curving into the smallest smile. Her courage grew stronger with his promise. The fear had not vanished, but it no longer ruled her. She whispered again, her voice soft but steady. Together. Daniel's heart steadied. The choice had been made. He would not abandon her, even if it cost him his life. He had faced death before, but this was different. Now he was not fighting for himself. He was fighting for her, for them. The sun dipped low, shadows stretched across the ruins. Daniel rose to his feet, his blade in hand. Lyra stood beside him, small but unshaken. Their bond was now their shield, stronger than fear, stronger than fate. When the hunters returned, they would not find a frightened child and a lone traveler. They would find a promise unbroken, a heart's choice made. The evening sky turned crimson. Shadows of broken towers stretched across the ruins. Daniel stood at the entrance of the chamber, his blade in hand. Lyra stood just behind him, her small frame wrapped in the blanket, but her glowing eyes steady. She no longer trembled like before. She was afraid, yes, but she was also ready. In the distance, horns echoed again. The hunters were returning, their voices loud, their steps many. Daniel's jaw tightened, his heart pounded, but his mind was clear. He had already made his choice. There was no turning back. Lyra reached for his sleeve, her fingers clung to him. Together, she whispered. Daniel looked down at her, his chest heavy but strong. Together, he answered. His hand briefly covered hers. The hunters appeared at the ridge, their armor shining in the fading light. Dozens of them, armed and merciless. Their leader pointed toward the chamber, shouting orders. Daniel stepped forward, his body blocking the path. The wind tugged at his torn coat. the blade gleaming faintly in his grip. "Stay behind me," he told her. But Lyra shook her head. She placed her small hand on the stone wall. Her glowing patterns flared brighter. This time, she was not hiding her gift. She was embracing it. The chamber walls lit with faint lines, old marks of her people reawakening. The hunters charged. Daniel met them with steel. His blade struck. His body moved with fierce resolve. Every strike was for her. Every step was to protect her. Yet he was not alone anymore. Behind him, light burst from Lyra's hands, waves of energy striking the enemies. Some fell, others stumbled back in fear. Together they fought, Daniel's strength and her power weaving like one. The ruins shook, dust and fire filled the air. The hunters cried out in anger and terror. For every step they tried to take forward, Daniel and Lyra pushed them back. Still the battle was out already. As brutal, Daniel's arm burned from wounds, his breath heavy, but each time he staggered, Lyra's voice called his name. Her glow gave him strength. She was no longer a fragile child needing protection. She was his partner in survival. Finally, after what felt like an endless storm, the hunters broke. Their leader snarled but called for retreat. The survivors fled into the distance, their voices fading into the night. Silence returned to the ruins, heavy but victorious. Daniel dropped to one knee, his blade slipping from his hand. Lyra rushed to him, her glowing eyes wide with worry. She pressed her small hands against his wounds, whispering in her alien tongue. He caught her hands gently, shaking his head. "I'm fine," he whispered. She shook her head stubbornly, refusing to let go. He looked at her then, really looked. This tiny alien girl, once abandoned and trembling, had chosen to fight beside him. Her kiss had shaken his heart. Her awakening had revealed her strength. And now, her courage had saved them both. He knelt fully before her, placing his hand over his chest. "You are not alone anymore, Lyra," he said softly. His voice was steady but filled with emotion. Her glowing eyes shimmered with tears. She touched his cheek with her tiny hand, her voice a whisper. "Daniel, stay." "I will," he answered without hesitation, his promise sealed in the silence between them. The stars rose above the ruins. The world was still dangerous, but neither of them cared. They had found something stronger than fear, stronger than loss. Daniel lifted her gently into his arms. She leaned against him, her small hand holding onto his shirt. From that night forward, they were no longer strangers bound by chance. They were bound by choice, by trust, by something eternal. The universe had abandoned her, but humanity, through him, had given her a reason to live. And Daniel knew in now his heart, he would protect that reason until his last breath.